Iona, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Your blog aims to engage with young people, and that is exactly the market that this industry need to engage with. What more can be done, and what are those young people saying to you?
Well, I mean, where do you begin? It's just such a mammoth task for the pensions industry. I think that we're slowly grasping that young people only have so much money and they have a lot of very urgent priorities, and we all know that the cost of housing today is not just a theoretical ambition that young people want to get on the housing ladder and have this asset. It's the fact that they are seeing half their rent or half their income, or even more than half their income swallowed up in rent. So right now they're looking for ways out of that situation, and you can't blame them for having that aspiration to get on the housing ladder. So that invariably conflicts with the aspiration to have a retirement income, and people are making choices. And I do worry that when we have contribution rates go up for auto-enrolment, that more young people will be questioning where the money's going, what's it doing for me, is it going to be invested in my best interests, and is there another way? So I think that we're going to see a much more dynamic and fast-moving pensions industry in the next 10 to 15 years, which is no bad thing. Possibly a realisation that pensions as they are right now cannot continue in their current form. They're going to have to be reformed, they're going to have to maybe be rebranded. The associations of pensions, maybe they're not very positive for the younger generations.
Absolutely, rebranding is a big issue, a big topic. Even this association changed its name to involve lifetime savings as part of its name.
Yep.
That's what young people need to grasp is, the bad rap perhaps pensions have had doesn't mean that you don't need to save for life.
Yes, absolutely. And it's about now changing the message so that we're not just telling people to save, because that's not worked. We've spent since I've been in this industry, spent the last 6 years, it seems, just saying you must give up your Sky subscription and you must save more into a pension. And that's just not going to cut the mustard, because people will end up questioning what the money's being used for, and what the benefits are to them in the shorter term as well as in the longer term. So I think that the Lifetime ISA at least introduces more choice into the industry. It has its flaws and its risks, but it starts to open up a debate about, how can we engage young people more with their savings, rather than, just saying to them, right, put your money into a pension, don't worry about it, forget all about it, and then in 40 years' time it'll all be fine. I don't think that is the right message. What we need to be saying is, this is something that you're going to have to take responsibility for, whether you like it or not. And here are your options, and here is how the stock market works, because it's amazing how many young people don't even have the first idea about how investments work. So we need to have so much more education before we can start to kind of compel people into saving for a pension.
Indeed, Richard Butcher, the new chair, who's the incoming chair of the PLSA, he described this morning as even just using something as basic as a graphic with a traffic light, showing you where your pot needs to be. Is it in the red zone? Is it amber? Is it green for go? You've got enough. Are there illustrations? Are there ways of communicating with a younger market that would work better?
I think so. I think that just putting some content on your website isn't going to do the trick. I think that you're going to have to get into people's phones, because that's how people are managing their life now. That Guy Opperman today was talking about life admin, and how the pensions dashboard will hopefully tap into that desire to want to manage everything through your phone. I think that's a really, really good step forward, but just giving people information isn't enough. I think that we need to reconsider Pot Follows members, so that all these people who are moving jobs are not going to just accumulate a vast number of small pots that are going to not give them the income that they need, and it's just going to make for a very confusing retirement picture.
Indeed, all the different annual statements that people receive that they can't even understand if they're receiving 5 of those because they've moved jobs. This is a different kind of work structure we're in now, and we're moving towards a different gig economy.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I'm self-employed, and I just wonder whether or not that is going to take off so much more among younger workers. It's not really there at the moment. I think that still a lot of younger workers are in the workplace, and maybe they view their employers in a very paternalistic way still, but I think that is going to change, and we are going to see more people becoming self-employed, working flexibly, and certainly that poses interesting questions if you're a woman, because actually we've had a long-standing crisis in the pensions industry about how we get women to look after themselves more financially. So hopefully we will start to see a world in which, women realise that actually part of being financially independent is looking out for your future savings and looking out for your retirement. And I'm getting the impression that we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet.
So the main issue for that younger market is just that there isn't the spare cash around. That's
Yes,
the message that you're getting.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so much confusion about whether it is right to save up for a house, because I think we've adopted quite a moralistic stance on, saving for a home in this country. And some people think that it's a waste of money, that we're going to see a house price crash at some point, and therefore, the value of that asset will be wiped out. So it's madness to prioritise that. But I think that we still have a long-standing systemic problem with not enough houses being built. And whilst that's the case, demand's still going to be there, and due to all sorts of other social factors as well, demand is still going to be very buoyant. So whilst that's the case, you can't blame young people for having that aspiration to get on the housing ladder. But they also need to think about debt. And it's quite encouraging, actually, at conference I've been hearing a lot about maybe developing schemes to help employees repay debt through their employers. And I think that is very positive, because actually once you get that monkey off your back, you can then concentrate and engage much more fully with your pension.
Because if people are worrying about debt, they're not going to be thinking about what they can save at that point.
Absolutely, and it's a trade-off, isn't it? It's a question of saying, well, do we get people saving into the pension at an earlier point and not really understanding how it works, and just hoping that just sheer years will hopefully make up a big enough pension pot? Or do we say, actually, is it better that people get their financial house in order, that they look at the basics, they look at their basic savings, they look at their debt, and they maybe, yes, get onto the housing ladder, and then they go, right, okay, here is my pension plan. I'm going to really engage with this and make sure that I'm taking enough risk over this time frame and that I'm picking the right investments. I just wonder whether that is a far better model to aspire to.
How much of this needs to be driven by the government, and how much of this do we need to be told to be doing as well, rather than it being free choice? Because that's what's happened in Australia. It is seen as a success story.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that we're in this unfortunate halfway house at the moment, where on the one hand, we have this supposedly gentle nudge into the workplace pension, but actually it is more of a shove, because there aren't really any other options for your average employee. And they're not really told that much that's useful to them about their pension, nothing that they feel is theirs and that they can take ownership of. Whereas compulsion obviously is getting towards that extreme point where we say, look, tough love, we're going to force you to have to save for the long term in this way. Unfortunately, I just don't think that will work in this country, and I think that lots of young people are already feeling very resentful about the fact that the older generations had defined benefit schemes, a fairly generous state pension, and the triple lock, which is continuing at the moment, even though we all know it's unsustainable, but will almost certainly not be there by the time I get to retirement.
And it's also many of that generation who are senior in government and companies who are now telling those young people, this is what you should be doing.
Yes.
And as you say, it doesn't sit well.
No, absolutely. It's very alienating, actually. And I think that we need to be very careful now about the messages that we send to young people. And with my blog, I'm in a fortunate position where I feel like I can sit between the young consumer and the industry and say, okay, I know more than the average person in the street, but the temptation to come to conference is to pretend to know more than you actually do. And what I want to offer is my young perspective and say, let's not forget about that. Let's keep remembering, what it was like to be young, and remember the world that we're living in now and how different it was from maybe the times that a lot of people here were growing up in.
And it's a very fast evolving world, let's face it.
Yeah.
Things are going to look very different even in 10 years' time in terms of technology and where we're going.
Totally. And I think that technology will ultimately be to our benefit, and we will develop those really clever solutions to this problem. But I don't think it's the silver bullet, and I think that education now is happening in schools. How good is that education? I don't know. How comprehensive is it? Are all young people receiving it? It's very doubtful, because it's on the national curriculum, but the national curriculum is not taught in all schools, of course. And it still relies on teachers feeling confident and enlightened enough, really, to understand that financial literacy is a universal skill that we all need. I mean, there are certain aspects, I'm sure this is true for you, certainly aspects of my school education went completely out of my head the day I left school. Whereas, if I'd have been taught thankfully I was taught in the home about money, but if I'd have been taught at school the basics of money and just feeling like it was an important subject, just acknowledging, yes, this is something that we all need to know, that would have stayed with me, I think.
Taking responsibility for your own future.
Absolutely, because you're going to have to do it sometime down the line, and it's better that you learn the easier way than the harder way. And I just find that lots of young people now, they're getting into their late 20s, and they maybe took out lots of credit card debt when they were in their early 20s, and now they're, wise, they understand, the long-term consequences of their decisions, they're not impulsive, they can be much more independent-minded, but they really regret those decisions they took in their early 20s. And we just entrust too much financial responsibility onto the younger generations now. We think that they know what they need to know when they've left school, and they don't.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you and get that younger perspective through your blog and everything.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.